$1 trillion.
Morbius. Finally, after 2 years, this movie comes out, and I know what you're all thinking. Oh boy, I can't wait for Matt to tear this movie apart limb from limb. But I'm gonna be honest, guys. I actually kind of like this movie. I enjoyed it. Okay, wait, hold on. Don't shoot. Okay, let's all calm down now. Let me explain why I enjoyed this movie. For the most part of 2020, I decided to read some of the Morbius comics and comic books that have Morbius in them in order to get hyped for the Morbius movie, which was supposed to come out in 2020, but then it got delayed due to the pandemic, so I had the comic books to basically read through in order to enjoy myself for this quote-unquote Morbius hype. And I gotta say, I like the character. You know, he's not the most intriguing or complex character, but he's certainly interesting enough for me to like him. And because of that, I guess you could say I actually was genuinely hyped for the movie just to see how they do the character justice. And while the movie is certainly not the greatest film out there, it has a rather generic plot. The movie itself isn't actually all that bad. At least, it's not as bad as the critics are making it out to be. The critics are way too harsh on this movie. They're acting like it's the worst Marvel movie ever, and I'm like, guys, there are worse superhero movies than this. I'm just saying, the movie doesn't have this great plot that'll change your life forever, but calm down, it's not like it's committing a crime or anything. Looking at you, Sean Reviews, who compare this movie to Cuties of all things. Yeah, that's how far people are going to hate this movie, to the point where they're comparing it to literal child, P-word. I'm just gonna say it right now, Morbius is not a bad movie, and I don't think it's the worst thing ever. That's not to say I don't have any criticisms for the movie. Obviously, I do have some problems with it, like the editing. In the beginning of the movie, there's a flashback scene, and it's just weirdly edited to the point it feels rushed. In fact, the editing for the most part seems to be trying to copy the Christopher Nolan style of editing, where it's fast-paced and it cuts the scenes really fast. That's the best way to describe this movie. The movie is really fast. Despite the movie's rush pace though, there is still a lot to enjoy from this movie, and if you are trying to get invested into this movie, I feel like you might find some things that you might like about this movie. Jared Leto plays the main protagonist, Morbius, and he's actually not that bad of a character. You sympathize with him in the beginning, and you want to see him try to cure himself and others, and then he becomes a vampire, this movie monster thing. You have to have some sympathy for him, because if you don't care about the character, well, you're just not gonna like this movie. But as someone who actually cared about the character and got invested, you start to see, wow, he's not that bad. And Jared Leto's performance was really good. There's a moment in the movie where he's trying to get rid of his best friend to protect him and he gets all angry. That was some really good performance. I applaud Jared Leto for that. In short, Jared Leto's character is actually pretty good on an objective standard if you're willing to be invested into him. But it's not just Jared Leto's character who's really good. Morbius may be the main protagonist, but I have a feeling most people are going to come out of the movie remembering the villain the most. Matt Smith's character as Milo, who's supposed to be an XP of Loch's Crown from the comic books. At first, I was kind of afraid that they were going to make a generic villain that was just kind of a dark mirror of the hero, but no, the character of Milo is actually pretty interesting and has some depth to him. You can sympathize with him, you can actually feel bad for him, and he actually does have a pretty good descendant into darkness kind of arc. Not to mention, he's got a lot of personality to him, like he really feels like he's enjoying the role of being this hammy, sort of cheesy villain, and it's not a bad thing actually. I would say I was pretty entertained by the villain. And besides our main protagonist and antagonist, there's also some side characters, namely Morbius' love interest Martine Bancroft. While she doesn't have a character arc, she's not all that forgettable. She's there to support Morbius, and there are moments where I found the couple pretty cute. Now, to be fair, most of those cute moments happen towards the end of the movie, so it kind of feels a bit too late that you're supposed to get invested in these characters, but it's only until the end of the movie. But I'd say the beginning still has some pretty neat moments between the two. There's also Tyrese Gibson's character Simon Stroud and his sidekick Buddy Cop that are supposed to be the comic reliefs. I have a feeling Simon Stroud was supposed to get a larger role because there were a lot of scenes in the trailer that were cut, and it's kind of implied that he was supposed to have a larger role, But these characters, they're not the type that are supposed to get huge arcs and character development. They're just there to move the plot forward, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if the comic reliefs did give me a laugh or two. Just talking about why I like this movie and how entertaining it was makes me realize I know why people don't like this movie, and I can understand them. People came in this movie expecting to see any Spider-Man connections or how it ties to the multiverse and stuff, and I feel like if you're just going to expect that and nothing else, then of course you're not going to like this movie. But if you actually give the time to actually give the characters a chance, who knows, you might like them. But then again, that's just my opinion. For the most part, the movie does have a rather basic and simple plot, but again, that's not a bad thing. Most MCU movies, especially ones that are highly praised, do have rather simple plots. It's the characters that help move the plot forward that really makes me enjoy this movie. Another reason why I enjoy this movie is just the action and all the B-movie levelness of this cheesy, hammy sort of film. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I'm the kind of guy who loves a good monster movie. A monster movie just has to be a monster doing monster things like killing people, eating people and stuff like that. I'm a sucker for that, and this movie does deliver on that. So if you're a monster movie fan, chances are you might enjoy this movie to some degree. And the special effects of the movie are well done. I'm gonna have to disagree with the critics on that one. Like, the special effects are not bad at all. They're really good. Now, I am going to give a spoiler warning here because, yes, I'm going to talk about the post-credits scene. Now, there is one thing I do agree with the majority, is that the post-credits scene is kind of it's not that good. Like, the Vulture just happens to show up in the Sony Spider-Man universe, and now he suddenly wants to team up with Morbius for some reason. There's just no logic behind it. Like, wouldn't he be worried about where his family is, or why is he in a different universe and stuff? And why would Morbius care to team up with the Vulture? I mean, he's a biochemist and a vampire now. I don't see what Morbius' motivation would be. Despite this, I will defend a couple of things about the post-credits scenes. For example, people are complaining that the Sony Spider-Man universe doesn't understand how Doctor Strange's spell is supposed to work. It's supposed to send the villains back to their universes, not bring others into it. Therefore, they don't understand the logic behind the spell. And yet, Spider-Man No Way Home, in that movie, the spell is also quite inconsistent. The spell was supposedly bringing people in who know who Peter Parker is, and yet Electro didn't know who Peter Parker was. And not to mention, why would they bring in Peter Parker himself? Does Peter Parker knowing who he is himself also count? That doesn't really make any sense. The spell was already inconsistent. It's not that far of a stretch to believe that Vulture could somehow be transported into the Sony Spider-Man universe. Also, people are misconstruing the scene to make it seem like Vulture is teaming up with Morbius to get revenge on Spider-Man, when he doesn't even imply that they're going after Spider-Man. He only says that they're going to do some good. Whatever that means, I don't know, but it's not explicitly stated that they're teaming up to fight against Spider-Man. But, oh well, people are gonna complain. It's not my problem. I enjoyed this movie. That's not to say I don't understand why people don't like this movie. People just came into this movie just to see if there's any Spider-Man connections, and I'm afraid to say there's not that whole many Spider-Man connections aside from a few Easter eggs. Despite that, I ended up enjoying the movie for what it is. It's an action monster movie with some heart to it. I'll give it 6 out of 10 stars.
Oh my God!